This is apropos. Well, this Monday is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and so far today, more than 30,000 children have been married somewhere around the world. Every 3 seconds, a girl is forced into marriage. Robbing children of agency and bodily autonomy, the practice also undermines their emotional, sexual and reproductive health. Faith Mwangi-Powell has more.
Every 3 seconds, somewhere in the world, a girl child gets married. That's the data provided by Unicef, the UN's children agency, who attest that every year 12 million girls under the age of 18 become child brides worldwide. Many factors often interact to place a girl at risk of child marriage. They often come from poor backgrounds, rural areas or marginalised groups. Factors like poverty, lack of education and social or religious norms all play a part. Families may marry off their daughters, believing it to reduce economic burden. Others may believe it will protect their daughters or secure their futures. The girls are thus more likely to be out of school than their peers and robbed of the chance of an education, a childhood and a future. These girls are also made more vulnerable to discrimination and domestic violence, also accompanied by early and frequent pregnancy and childbirth, contributing to higher than average maternal mortality rates. The past decade, however, has seen global initiatives make waves in the 12 nations where child marriage is most prevalent. 25 million child marriages have been prevented globally due to stronger female education, government investment and public awareness. Despite this, the prevalence of child marriage remains high, with sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia having the highest statistics of underage brides. South Asia may be home to 44% of the world's child brides, but it's also seen the greatest decline in child marriage in recent decades. A UNICEF report published last year found that the percentage of child marriages had dropped from 23% to 19% worldwide. But the UN agency said it's still not fast enough to achieve the goal of eliminating the practice by 2030. UNICEF estimates no region is currently on track to meet this target.
Well, globally, 139 countries lack adequate legislation prohibiting child marriage. To discuss, we're joined now by Dr. Faith Mwangi-Powell, CEO of Girls Not Brides, a global network of more than 1,400 civil society organisations. Dr. Faith, thank you so much for being with us on the programme this evening. We saw some of the statistics rather shocking in that report there by Vedika. There has been a decline in child marriage, experts say, over the past decade, but it remains widespread. You say 12 million children are married around the world each year, and that collective action is needed to tackle this. What exactly is needed?
Thank you so much for having me. Just for our viewers, is to say child marriage or child early and forced marriage and union is any marriage or union between two people where one of them is less than 18 years old. And I agree that progress is happening. There is great work happening all over the world, but we need more. What we are asking for is stronger registration across the countries we work, asking governments to support reinforcing the law. Many governments have enacted laws, but we want those laws reinforced. We also want domestic financing. We cannot continue relying on external funding. We want government to fund some of the national strategies they have developed, but we also want to make sure we safeguard girl education. There are still too many girls who are out of school, and when girls are out of school, the most likely option for them is child marriage. So we want to continue encouraging governments to act, but not to act alone, to see civil society and community leaders and parents and teachers. Everybody has a role to play. And that is what we are talking about when we speak about collective action. And I agree with you, there is no country which is on track. And in this era, we really want to see child marriage ended so that communities and girls all over the world can live and fulfill their full potential and the dreams of the people they need to be.
And who is most at risk then of child marriage? It mostly affects girls, but it can also affect young boys.
We have seen in areas like Latin America, there are child unions, which are unions between girls and boys, but largely child marriage and forced union affect girls. And mainly it's because of how girls are valued in communities. Girls are not as valued as boys. And that value, that gender inequality, where girls are not treated as equal to boys, really puts them at greater risk of vulnerabilities. Girls are also seen as the right people, the default of household chores, so that they are denied the opportunity to go to school, they are held back, and that holding back of girls means them that they are more at risk of child marriage. So while I agree that boys are also at risk, mainly child marriage affects girls all over the world.
And you speak about how societal and cultural norms make girls essentially less valuable in some cultures than boys. But how do you change those norms?
The biggest thing to change is community dialogue. We need to communicate, we need to discuss with allies, with communities where child marriage is practiced, and to demonstrate the value of girls. We need role models in communities, girls who have gone to school, girls who can then come and be productive members of the community. So it's addressing, and I know I'm using a bit of jargon, it's addressing the social norms or the cultural norms which underpin this practice. You go to some communities and they tell you this is what happened to my grandmother, this is what happened to my mother, this is what's going to happen to my children. And it's trying to break that cycle, but through community dialogue and also providing alternatives and education. I always say education is not there is no silver bullet to end child marriage, but education comes really close, because we have seen when girls go to school, when they are given those opportunities to really fulfill their own dreams, then we come close to ending child marriage. And even the declines you talked about earlier, those declines have been realized because girls have more access to education.
And Faith, the situation varies depending on which country we look at. There's been progress in Sierra Leone, for example. Legislation passed there this year to end child marriage. The situation is much worse in places like Iraq, where new laws there could make it legal for girls as young as 9 to be married. But this isn't an issue that just affects countries in the developing world, is it?
No, this is actually an issue for globally, which affecting countries all over the world. Even in the UK, here where I'm based in London, it's only last year where the law was changed that girls cannot be married below the age of 18. It was okay for girls to be married at the age of 16 with a parental consent. So that law has now changed. It has changed in England and Wales. We are still working to change that law in Scotland. In the US, there are several states where they don't have laws. It's state by state. I know our partners and Change at Last are working state by state to change the laws that girls can be married above the age of 18. And I want to also acknowledge the great work which has happened in Sierra Leone. Great championship by the Minister of Education and Minister of Health. And what they have done is to not only introduce a law which prohibits child marriage by the age of 18, they have also allowed married girls to be able to re-enter education, to be able to go to school. And by doing that, they are breaking the cycle of child marriage, which is incredible. And that is what we are asking governments and countries to do, to make sure that we also do not forget the married girls. What is the opportunity for the married girls to secure their own future? Those are some of the things we are asking governments to look into as well.
And what can be learned from countries like that then? Also in places like South Asia, it's on pace to eliminate child marriage almost completely in about 50 years or so.
I think what we can learn is also to recognize that child marriage is very contextual, is to say that we can learn from the countries which are ending child marriage, but we also need to understand the drivers in each context. We need to understand where poverty can be a great driver, where social norm, religious practices can be a great driver. Once we understand that, then we really start addressing those root cause and championing and partnering with religious leaders, traditional leaders, parents, because by doing that, then we are really going to the heart of the decision makers or the norm holders, if you like. But in Asia, what we have seen, the greatest reason why we have seen this decline is greater access to education. And you talked about that at the start. But also what we are seeing is that the most marginalized and the poor girls are still at very, very high risk. So the big challenge now we have is reaching the girls who are most marginalized, those who are living under the poverty line, those who are living in rural areas. Those are the girls we really need to target, because at the urban areas, we are really seeing progress as girls have greater access to education.
And the UN agency UNICEF, it says that conflict, climate shock, economic problems, other crises are threatening to reverse some of the progress that we are seeing in some of the countries we've been speaking about. Is that something you'd agree with?
Absolutely. We are actually calling it the polycrisis right now, because we are seeing, even when COVID happens, the school closures. There were some countries like Uganda where schools were closed for over 2 years. And that really put so many girls at risk. Teenage pregnancy went up. And when girls got pregnant, that predisposes them to marriage. We have seen climate change when there is drought, when there is not food insecurity. Parents sometimes choose to marry off girls so that they have less children to feed. We have also seen this migration and conflict, areas of conflict. We have seen those girls really are in greater vulnerabilities for child marriage. So we are seeing what we are calling a polycrisis, and that polycrisis, we need to really respond and be conscious that in different communities, food security is important. Climate mitigation is important. Making sure there is cash transfers to mitigate poverty so that girls can go back to school. So there are different ways we can address this, but absolutely you're right that these crises are putting girls at greater risk. And of course, boys as well, in communities where there are unions of boys and girls, this putting these young people at risk.
Faith, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for your time on the programme with us this evening. That is Dr. Faith Mwangi-Powell, CEO of Girls Not Brides.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, that is it.